Hello and welcome to another pen video from me, Penultimate Dave. So I have here another inks comparison video, and this is purple inks comparison number 4. So I think with that, let's go and swab up some of these inks. So I get a lot of questions on how I do these ink videos. So I decided I would add this to the front of each of the ink videos. I put links in the description, but I know some of you watch this on TVs or mobile devices, so you don't get to see this. So first off, the paper is the number one question I get asked. What paper do I use for these ink comparison videos? So this is the original Tomoe River. This is 52 GSM, and it is the white, not the cream, the white. Where possible, I try to go for the white because the cream can actually change the color of the ink just a little bit. So this is Tomoe River 52 GSM in the white. A lot of people get confused as well because I have what looks to be a grid on this page, and it's actually an Oxford Optik pad. These are the pads that I actually use when I'm writing my writing samples for pen reviews or in my currently ink. So they have these little squares up here. I just use that because it's a good guide for me when I put this very thin sheet of Tomoe River over. I can actually see squares, so it helps me write a little bit sort of straight on the page. Not always, but sometimes it does. The other thing that I also have is I have a bottle of water, plain water, and I dip my nib in here. So for consistency, I use the same fountain pen, or I guess it's not a fountain pen, it's using a fountain pen nib though. This is a 3D printed pen from William Shakour in the UK. So he prints this material 3D, and it has a number 8 size Bock nib which I can unscrew, and you can see there. So it is just a dip pen holder for a number 8 size Bock nib, and the idea is I want to have consistency with the writing sample. So I use this, I dip it in the ink, I write, and then I will dip it in here, and I will rinse the nib off several times, and I will dry it, and then at that point I will then go on to do the next ink swatch and the next writing sample. So there you have it. That's how I do my ink swatches. So I just wanted to show you that here. Now on to the ink comparison video. The first ink here is Monteverde Blueberry Muffin, and it's part of the Monteverde Sweet Life collection of inks. So we'll do an ink swatch, and you can see that this is quite a lovely colour. Now, is this a purple colour? I would say probably not, although blueberries typically can be purple. So I've added this one just as a comparison, almost an honourable mention. So this is Monteverde, and it's blueberry muffin. But as you can see there, it's not really a purple, but it's an honourable mention. The next one here is, again, another Monteverde Sweet Life collection. This is Monteverde Birthday Cake. I think let's do an ink swatch here. Now, this is a bit of a violety lavender colour, as you can see there, as the ink swatch starts to go a little bit drier. We'll do a second pass to show the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib, also to try and show some shading as well in this ink. So this is Monteverde, and it is Birthday Cake. But that is quite a nice colour. The next ink is KWZ, and it's Gummiberry. So we'll do an ink swatch, and this is one of my favourite purple inks. It's not my absolute favourite, but it's certainly my second go-to purple ink that I have. So we'll do a second pass over the top to show difference between a wet and dry writing nib, and also to try and show some shading as well. So this is KWZ, and it's a Gummiberry. But that, for me, is my second most favourite purple ink. The next ink here is Diamine Tyrian Purple. So we'll do an ink swatch. And again, is this a purple ink? It's bordering on purple, but let's see when it dries. So this, we'll do a second pass here to show the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib, and also to try and highlight some of the shading and possibly sheening as well. So this is Diamine, and it is Tyrian Purple. But that is an interesting purple. It's not really what I would think of as a regular purple. Purple to me is a darker purpley colour, a little bit like KWZ Gummiberry, or even darker still. The next ink here is Diamine Imperial Purple. So let's do an ink swatch. And I have to say, this is really my kind of purple. This probably should actually become one of my top purple inks. I have started using it a bit more lately. I'm going to try and saturate the top layer here, show the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. I'd also like to show the difference between shading but also sheen, because this one should, in theory, sheen. And this is Diamine, and it is Imperial Purple. Now, I know what you're saying. How do you know this is going to sheen, Dave? Well, here's the rim of the bottle. So that is quite a sheening ink. So I'm hoping it will catch it on camera. And then the last purple ink here today is Diamine Majestic Purple. So we'll do an ink swatch. And if you've watched enough of my either ink comparison videos or my currently inked, you will know that Diamine Majestic Purple is my most favourite purple ink. I know most people typically gravitate towards Diamine Imperial Purple. I started off with Diamine Majestic Purple. So I'm just going to saturate that top half there, and that will be to try and show the shading properties, to show the difference between an ink, a wet versus dry writing nib, and also to try and show off some sheen if there is any. Now, I know you're going to ask, does there seem to be any sheen? There really isn't a lot of sheen around the rim of the body there. It's hardly even noticeable, I would say. But I do sometimes find this ink sheens. So this is Diamine, and it's Majestic Purple. So I think now that these inks have dried, let's take a little bit more of a closer look at these inks. So the first ink here is Monteverde Blueberry Muffin, and I know some of you will say that this isn't a purple ink. It's bordering on purple, so I added it here as an honourable mention. You can see a lot of difference between the wet and the dry writing nib. You can see here on the writing sample, this is a wet writing nib, so it corresponds with the upper pass. You can also see quite a bit of shading here. Now, let me show you a closer look up of this ink. There is some sheen around the edges here. Not a huge amount of sheen, I have to say, but there is just a little bit of sheen. There isn't any sheen on the writing sample though, so this isn't going to be a high sheening ink, but it does have a very minute amount of sheen there. The next ink here is Monteverde and its birthday cake. And this is a little bit more of a purplish ink, lavender maybe, maybe a blurple. That's another one to call it. You can see a huge difference between what would be wet versus dry writing nib. This is a wet writing nib sample. There is some shading going on here between the pooled areas of ink. And if I show a close-up here, you'll see that there is more of a lighter purple going on in some of those areas. Is there any sheen to this ink? No, there is not. But it is a beautiful ink nevertheless. The next ink is my second favourite purple ink, or has been my second favourite purple ink. And this is KWZ Gummiberry. So you can see a huge difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. This is definitely a wet writing nib. You can see where the ink is pooled that there is shading going on there. Now, this ink is still just a little bit wet there at the top, but you can start to see some sheen around the edges here of that ink. So KWZ Gummiberry can sheen a little bit. I typically don't see it in writing samples with wet nibs, but it is a possibility. The next ink here is Diamine Tyrian Purple. And again, is it a purple coloured ink? I think it's on its way to being purple. It's not what I would consider purple. I typically consider one of these three being purple, but there are variances in purple. So this is Diamine Tyrian Purple. There's the difference between the wet and also the dry writing here. You can see Diamine Tyrian Purple in the writing sample is quite wet. Now, there is some shading going on around the pooled areas, and if I show you this up close, there is also some sheen going on around the edges here. It's a very, very subtle sheen. It's not a huge amount of sheen, but you can see some sheen there, but it's not going to be in your face kind of sheen. The next ink here is Diamine Imperial Purple, and if you remember, I showed you the rim of the cap and it had a gold sheen on it, so you can definitely see some gold sheen here, and I'll show you that in a little bit more detail. You can see the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. This is a wet writing nib. There is a little bit of shading, but it's more sheen than anything. So if I can try and show you that sheen there, there's quite a lot of sheen on that wetter portion at the top of that ink swatch. Now, there is a slight amount of sheen in the writing sample. I would say on the D of Diamine, I'm seeing a little bit there. It may be hard to show that on camera, but you can get sheening from that ink in a writing sample. It's just not a huge amount of sheen. Now, the other ink that I find is my number one favourite is Diamine Majestic Purple. Now, it's the purple that I always went for because I looked at Imperial Purple and I looked at Majestic Purple, and I thought Majestic Purple looked a little bit darker. Looking at these two samples, I'd kind of say that maybe Imperial Purple looks a little bit darker than Majestic Purple. You can definitely see a difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. I would actually say, though, in terms of the writing sample, the Diamine Majestic Purple does look more darker than the Imperial Purple to me. Now, there is a little bit of shading going on here, certainly around the pooled areas. Is there any sheen? I'm not seeing sheen there either on the ink swatch or on the writing sample. Now, I have had sheen from Diamine Majestic Purple. So if you have a ink that could have sheening properties to it, if you leave it inked up in a pen for a few weeks or a few months, you don't write with it, you uncap the pen and you start writing with it, some of that water out of the ink will have evaporated, making it a thicker viscousy ink, and that can affect obviously the dye and bring out the sheening property. So I have had Diamine Majestic Purple sheen quite a bit, even in writing samples, but typically it's been of pens that I have had sat around for a few weeks, or maybe don't have a good capping mechanism, and they will dry out maybe after a few days. But you can certainly find that on some pens that you would write with this ink. However, I'm not seeing it here in both the ink swatch or the writing sample. So that's my Diamine inks comparison number 4 video. If there are any inks you like here, let me know in the comments below. If there are other inks that you like and would like me to compare, or if there are other inks that are very similar to these, then do let me know in the comments below. So that's my Diamine. So that's my purple inks comparison number 4 video. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next pen video. Bye bye.